"Where's the key?" Applejack hastily asked. "The desk," Rarity whimpered. She slumped against her wall as her injured leg hanging loosely to the side while Applejack retrieved the key. She was back within moments, shaking Hoof's attempt to fit the key into the lock. Rarity ignited her horn, taking it from Applejack, sliding it effortlessly. Rarity turned it with her magic, but the key would not budge. "Let me try." Applejack put her weight into the task. The small metallic snap was heard before Applejack tumbled to the ground. Both ponies looked in horror to find the key half broken, half unreachable, now in the lock. "Step back, Rare." Rarity hobbled away from the door, while Applejack reared up her forelegs, bucked at the wood. Rarity winced a little, the sound of the impact ringing in her ears. She covered them with her hooves as Applejack bucked in a quickening crescendo. On the fourth buck, the wood began to groan and splinter. The only compelled Applejack to buck harder. With the one furious kick, door gave away, bursting into two and flying across the room, exploding on impact. This was when Applejack steadied herself. Exhausted from the sustained bucking and reaching out for Rarity again, she helped guide the ivory mare under the jagged wood shards that hung haphazardly from the frame. Rarity stumbled as she walked, her hoof in searing pain whenever she accidentally brushed it against the floor. Her eyes had been shut against the pain as AJ guided her through the shattered maw of what was left of the door. As Applejack released her hoof, Rarity opened her eyes to take in her new surroundings. She gasped and stumbled backwards, shock and terror flashing through her with a quick succession. As she realized that they weren't outside, but instead back in the second-story bedroom, she wrenched her neck as she looked back in horror to see the door they had just entered. An all too familiar trail of bloody hoof prints in a line across the broken and splintered fragments of the heavy wooden door that now lay in shambles. "Applejack?" Rarity whispered, an undercurrent of fear and terror in her voice. She then turned to gaze back inside the room, expecting it to find a disarray and Applejack standing nearby. Instead, her eyes found it completely bare of anything, with the exception of a single large barrel filled to the brim with apples. Rarity approached the barrel, her breathing ragged as she had her eyes welling up with tears as she recognized the marking branded into the age-oaken wood. "No, no," Rarity whispered, tears cascading down her cheeks. As she moved closer to the smell of rot and rancid decay assaulted her senses. She plugged up her nose and squinted her eyes against the horrible odor. The room was merely silent as she approached the barrel, save for the soft, wet, quelching sounds that only further added to her growing nausea. Against her better judgment, she peered inside. Rarity marveled at the horror of the fruit carcass, each ruined and dissected, not a single one preserved from the carnage within. Apple cores inside shifted around within waves of meaves and maggots. They weaved and danced over the broken husks, making each barrel's contents appear alive. She wasn't sure how long she stood there in silent awe, entranced by the ghastly sight, before she was finally able to tear any of her attention away, wrenching violently on the floor. Her body shook with each ragged breath, her hoof wiping away the excess vomit from her lips as she dragged herself away from the barrel. She staggered backwards in shock until her rump pressed against the wall. She turned to flee the room, only to be greeted by a clean, unbroken pane. "The door! Where is the door? Where's the door?" Rarity jerkily ran her hooves across the wall in disbelief, her eyes darting back and forth in hopes of finding a seam or a latch, anything to free herself from this tormented chamber. "Applejack! Applejack, where are you? Why did you leave me?" Rarity wailed in torment. She beat her hoofs against it, hoping to find at least a weakness to muscle through. She wasn't much of an apple bucker, but she would beat her legs to a bloody pulp to get out of this place. "Applejack?" Rarity stopped, her breath catching in her chest, as she heard a familiar intonation of the mare's coming from the opposite side of the wall. She tilted her ears forward, recognized the clear voice of Twilight Sparkle. "Twilight? Twilight, please get me out of here!" Rarity screamed, and beat the wall with her hooves. "Twilight, can you hear me?" "Hey, Twi," came yet a calm, exhausted response from Applejack. "Applejack?" Rarity exclaimed in surprise and confusion, as her hooves lowered to the ground. She then pressed her ear to the wall as they continued to speak. "What's wrong?" Twilight asked, followed by a sound of wood scraping against wood and creak against some pony sitting on a stool. Rarity's brow furrowed in confusion. She slowed her breathing as best she could in order to hear the other ponies on the other side of the wall. "What's wrong isn't it's more accurate. Things around here have been near impossible," Applejack said in a hushed voice. "I did notice you seemed a bit off today. Why is that?" Twilight replied. "It's just that since me and Rainbow Dash called it quits, feels like everything's been thrown out of whack." "You and Rainbow broke up?" "They broke up?" Rarity asked softly aloud to herself. "We would never should have started it, to be honest. It was great at first. There was a lot of tension here, but that just sort of melted away, you know," Applejack said, to which Twilight laughed as a reply. "But I don't think I want to know," she answered. AJ joined in with a chuckle. "But you can't just put North and North together on a magnet. They just don't click." "But you did seem so good for each other, and didn't you say anything when you were all helping make cider?" She's just choosing to ignore it from now. Maybe once I'm the one who broke it off, maybe she thinks I might change my mind." "Will you?" "Not likely. I'm sick of all the fighting. Nah, love just ain't for me." "But what about—" "I already moved on. Today was plenty of evidence for, that, don't you think?" "I did notice, yes." "Anyway, I'm mighty tired. Figure we'll burn some candlelight and finish out filling these cider orders before turning in. Thanks for your help, Twi." "Anytime." Rarity heard the unmistakable sound of Twilight's magic teleporting her away, presumably to the castle. It was quickly followed by a struck match of the creak of the door that was just an odd metal lantern. "No, Applejack, no, don't!" What is it now? What in darnation she going on about this consistent, darn it?" Applejack called out bitterly. Rarity was taken aback. Could Applejack hear her now? She pushed her away from the wall and now burnt beat-up hooves against it, calling out to her, "Applejack, I'm in here! Please, please help me!" Rarity squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing into a peeling paper as she slid uselessly from against her shaking hooves to the floor. She could hear the hoof steps approaching from the other side of the wall, decreasing the distance between them, when they suddenly stopped. She opened her eyes in surprise at this sudden halt, found her surroundings and shifted again. She was back in the original bedroom that she had been seen the morning before, the dorm and the room intact. Her shaking hooves had reached for the handle as she gave out a soft sob of relief when the door had opened in command. Choking in her own anguish and fear, she continued down the hallway towards the stairs. Her mind was too fractured to properly react to the pristine condition of the wooden steps. No traces of broken splinters she fought through earlier. She took each step quickly, but deliberately bracing herself for whatever twisted surprise awaited for her next misstep. She only paused for a brief moment at the base of the staircase, her eyes inspecting for the door. She reasoned that the attempt to get through would only be to yield a similar disastrous result. So she directed her attention towards the large window panel beside the door instead. Into her haste, she nearly missed it. The room around her was different, far more different than the other versions that she had seen this far. She could tell she wasn't in the boutique anymore, but rather some pony's office. Classy vintage furniture was arranged deliberately. A single desk, the same furniture Rarity swore she had seen much in more shape than under the sheets, and layers of dust in the basement. The walls were lit by the lantern light, although the wallpaper remained the same disgusting floral print she had learned to loathe. It appeared to be less tarnished and torn. She ran her hoof through the plush armchair, wondering if there was an illusion, but finding the feel of sort of fabric comforting. Different picture frames adorned the wall with an array of newspaper clippings, all hailing the dramatic detective duo of Red Herring and Q Wood continued success. The only personal effect in the room was a single picture resting on the desktop. It showed two stallions sitting on his very office, triumphant smiles beaming across their face. She took a step closer, trying to make out the details of each pony's face, but finding that the closer she got, the more obscure they became. There's only one way. Rarity's spun on her hooves, as to find that she wasn't alone. An older-looking stallion was walking towards her, dragging his hooves in defeat. He was an earth pony with a light red color and coat and gray crimson mane. His eyes looked tired, buried underneath the deep dark circles of his facial fur. He had a gray stubble on his cheeks, which only slightly masked his many wrinkles. He staggered closer to her. Rarity could detect the scent of urine and other body odors. Her disgust was elevated further by the strong fetid smell of alcohol in his breath. He continued unwaveringly towards her. Red urine? Is that you? Rarity asked in a whisper, but the pony didn't respond. She swallowed hard, garnering her courage to speak up and draw her attention to herself. Darling, are you all... Rarity squeaked in surprise, but flinched back as the stallion stumbled drunkenly towards her. She closed her eyes and embraced herself from the impact that didn't come. She closed her eyes and stared in shock at the wisps of her tail hair that had disappeared into her chest. She reached a hoof up as the last strand vanished, but found clean, unbroken fur. You're mad, aren't you? Rarity jumped and spun in surprise to see the haggard stallion behind her, still stumbling towards in a shaky but determined gait. Mad 'cause I figured it out, eh? Rarity watched in silence as the stallion rounded the corner behind his desk, packing up and picking an old woven rope in his hoof. Can't have intelligent victims? You just had to toy with me, didn't ya? He tied one of the rope to the back of his desk leg, knotting it securely. With him, always with him. With the other end in hoof, he paused for a moment, staring at it with a haunted expression. Eventually his breathing became more ragged and scratchy, until it turned into a dry laugh. What's one more? He threw the rope up the ceiling, presumably aiming for one of the lower rafters. It fell short, dropping to the ground with a thud. Luna, damn it! The stallion spat, securing the rope in his hoof again, while he carefully climbed onto the desk. He aimed his throw carefully, this time looping over the rafter, the rope sailing in the arc over the creaking edge beam. You hear that, you fucking demon? You won this round. Don't! Rarity whispered in horror, watching helplessly as the stallion tied a noose at the end of the rope. He was shaking now, a low menacing laugh-like growl reverberating the room. As he steadied himself on the edge of the desk, reflectively, Rarity had reached out to stop him, but her hard grip by the icy dread plummeting to her stomach as her hoof phased through its dirty, disheveled coat. You wanna know something funny, though? A devious smirk across his muzzle as the stallion reached a hoof behind his left ear, pulling out the cigar that had been nestled in his mane with a matchbook. He placed it in the side of the morbid grin. Between his teeth, his eyes stared in the fire of the match until at the end was cheery red and the look of a long pull from the cigar. As the room filled with its warm smell of tobacco, the stallion restrained his neck back up in place with a noose. The rafter above moaned and creaked, but held him firm. The stallion securely tightened the knot against the nape of his neck. Rarity felt silent tears streaking down her cheeks. She was unable to move or look away. I'm gonna be the last one, demon. I documented everything. Everything! All the evidence is right there in this desk. He tapped the hoof firmly upon the oaked-in plane beneath him, the grim and triumphant smile growing with each word. Some pony is gonna find it. Some pony will figure out just what you are, how many lives you've taken, and they'll destroy you. He took one last long draw on the cigarette, then bellowed as he sprang off from his desk. I'm your last fucking meal! Enjoy it, bitch! Rarity winced as she squeezed her eyes shut. She had seen enough horrors today, and she didn't want to see him die. Not like this. She braced for the sickening snap and the soft creak of the rope, only silence to be followed. Rarity slowly opened her eyes, found herself back in the boutique. boxes needing emptied in the room in sight of the stray. It looked as if should prior all the nightmares she had seen. "Oh, Red Herring, what had happened to you?" She shuddered at the memory of him. Those empty eyes, of the sorrow and madness. What was it that he said? A demon and the evidence? Rarity whispered to herself. He said it was left behind back in his desk, waiting for some pony to find it. Rarity rose to her hooves and weaved through the maze of boxes towards the basement hatch. The crowbar laid already beside it as she levitated with her magic into place, bringing both hooves down, popping it free with ease. Her magic opened the postern door for the rest of the way. She descended the steps, igniting her horn for light. It was jarring to see the pristine furniture and light fixtures from a few minutes ago, now depicted and covered in sheets, layers of dust. Her eyes scanned for the clutter and came to a rest on the target, Red Herring's desk. Rarity carefully picked her way through the clutter and debris around the desk. It stood against the far wall, close to the corner with a pile of newspapers. The desktop was covered in a thick layer of dust and boxes. Rarity had carefully lifted the boxes with her magic. Placing them with a stack to the side, she then levitated with each drawer open, desperately looking for the forementioned evidence that would hopefully shed light on what had been going on. Her hope had faded as each dresser revealed a naught but cobwebs and dust within. When she had found the last drawer bare, Rarity choked out a sob, slumping to the ground, hiding her face in her hooves. "What do I do now?" she gasped between sobs. She jumped when one of the boxes had precautiously stacked toppled over, spilling its contents before her. Rarity dry her eyes with the front hoof when she had realized that it had been filed with the other folders, yellowing parchment papers. Shakily she reached for her front hoof on the folder on top, her breath catching in her throat as her magic illuminated from her folders as so seal. "It's a red herring," she said, taking the details and the fish leaping from the water, mounted pressed cleanly to the folder's red wax seal. The name she didn't recognize was scrawled on top of the frantic hoof writing. Without missing a beat, Rarity broke the seal, opening the folder to find several hoof-pitten pages and old papers collected together under a detailed page. Clean-shaved born, moved to Salt Lake City, started a barber shop, died April 20th, having slit his own throat with his razor. Rarity gasped at the thought to keep her gorge from rising. Her weathered and faded photos inside the crime scene. The poor pony had ended himself just above her in the main floor entryway. Putting the grisly record aside, she picked up the next folder, breaking its seal and scanning the contents within. Merriweather purchased the building on the 6th flower shop, died from self-consumed pesticide poisoning. Despite her repulsion and fear, Rarity had continued through each file, gleaning the important facts of each pony's needs ultimately end before tossing it aside. Tragedies and horrors she had found with increasing the dread as the stacked sealed folders grew smaller and smaller. Each new victim's life seemingly cutting short by their own hoof but with some horrendous manner, and always within this house. Rarity forced herself to continue, hoping that she would find some hint as to what it all meant and how it could be stopped. She suddenly paused, realizing that she had reached the last 2 folders. Something in the pit of her stomach told her, scream at her, not to open the last files. She then started steadying her breath and reached for the first folder, compelling to her forward. "I'm already getting a funny feeling about this," Applejack said, causing Rarity to jump. "Applejack?" she exclaimed, dropping the folder, and she turned to grasp the orange mare in a fierce hug, freeing from the feeling of her friend's fur on hers, and the faint smell of apples that accompanied her gave such immense and comfort that she began sobbing loudly as she startled the foreign pony's chest. You can see me?" Applejack asked, her voice cracking in both disbelief and relief, as she wrapped the ivory mare in a returned hug. For a moment, Rarity pushed back and from the embrace and suspiciously eyed the mare in front of her. "What's wrong? How could you leave me like that? I've been worried sick and you left me here? Where did you go? Rarity sent a question after question, like a volley of arrows, punctuating each tap of her hoof in front of the empathist. Nowhere, I swear. I've been dealing with you the whole time, Applejack said, putting up her hooves defensively. Buckled down the floor here, and I saw that you were right back when we started. When it was just like you were seeing, something else. The look in your eyes, it was terrifying. I tried to get your attention, but it was like you couldn't see or hear me. You started screaming about being no door, and then you all started talking to yourself. You're hugging me in the wall, and I didn't know what the heck was going on. Rarity's gaze softened, and looked perplexed at her friend's eyes fell to the floor. You scared the hell out of me, Rare. But where were you the whole time? And then I saw him. Who? Applejack asked. Rarity paced back and forth, mowing the details in her head. Red Herring, the detective. He's the one who told me where to find the files. Well, he told some pony or something. He called it a demon. He said no pony else would fall victim to it again because he had gathered evidence, but there's nothing here except for the case files of former owners' deaths. If there's a clue here, I can't see it. The only commonly is that they took their own lives. There is nothing about their demon or how it chose its victims. Maybe there is. What do you mean? Maybe the demon in this is the building. Rarity quirked an eyebrow as Applejack continued with her fury. Every time we're trying to get on some sort of death or tragedy, maybe this place has a type. What? I didn't see that in the files. Applejack scanned and discarded the folders on the floor. She then found and opened the file for Merryweather and pointed at the last paragraph of the title page. Rarity levitated to the eye level, squinting as she read out loud the small text that she had missed. Merryweather would have often been spotted by locals at the Shademore Cemetery, placing her fleshly cut flowers on the grave of her late son, Sunnyweather. And that one, Applejack said, pointing to another file. Dr. Fondheart, a.k.a. Dr. Kind Care, filled Baltimore and after allegedly unleashing unknown virus to hospital patients, resulting in months painful treatment to those afflicted. He assumed that he had a new name, altered his appearance to start anew in Salt Lake City. Celestia's Mercy, Rarity said, imagining all the heartache and the pain and Kind Care left in his wake. I wonder, Rarity trailed off, searching the open files for the first one she read. Clean Shave, whom assumed to be the original owner of the building. Victorious, he has scanned his life for additional notes. Here it is. Clean Shave reportedly moved to Salt Lake City when his longtime family home was destroyed in an earthquake, claiming those lives of both his parents. Rarity trailed off when the paragraph ended, turning it over her magic and finding the parchment blank. The rest of the folder contained testimonials and old faded pictures from the outside view of the building. Newly bit surrounded neighborhood. She furrowed her brow in frustration. This still doesn't make any sense. What do you mean? I assume some sort of dark magic or terrible mishap would cause of this. But there's nothing here about the abnormalities or strange happenings in the construction. So what does that all mean? Rarity asked. Frustrated at the absence of the obvious conclusion, some part of her hoped that she could detect the source of the evil presence. She could conquer it, or at least try to escape to find some pony who could. She glanced back towards the two remaining files, seals intact. She shot Applejack a knowing glance before levitating the first with her magic. Rare, Applejack cautioned, still uneasy at the prospect of what contained inside. She broke the seal and opened the file folder, realizing whose it was to do only if she did so. P.I. Red Herring. That's odd. Well, why? Well, why would some pony include a file about himself and have his death already recorded? Maybe he filled it out before he jumped? Applejack guessed with a shrug. Rarity wasn't so convinced, but didn't contest the point, hoping that some suspicion that she was right. He moved to Salt Lake City after his last case in Manhattan went south, resulting in the accidental death of his partner Q. Rarity paused for an uncomfortably long moment. Why did you stop? Applejack prodded. I could have sworn I saw a photo of him taking this very building. If he died in Manhattan, Rarity trailed off as her face drained of what little color it had. She feverishly wiped Red Herring's file, or the remain of the sealed one, breaking the wax and flipping it open. She read a single word, screamed like a wounded animal, propelling the file across the room for magic. What is it now? Applejack called out to her. Rarity spun around in confusion, to find Applejack clear across the room. In the soft light of her magic, Rarity could see the visible differences in Applejack and her demeanor. She looked haggard, mane splintering all across directions, from a sweat-soaked hat, beads of it speckled along her cheeks. Her hooves were caked in mud, and she walked towards Rarity with a slow, reluctant trot. Those dark circles under her eyes had the piercing gaze. She gave Rarity cause to stumble backwards a step. Applejack, how did you? Not that you care, but this rotten cider barrel completely ruined by my hoof. Rarity had wiped her head around again, with a slight gasp, recognizing the sound of her own voice, each word ringing in her ear, the nerves fraying with each word. Oh no, not a ruined hoof cure. Whatever shall we do? Applejack asked mockingly. Whatever do you want from me? Another apology? What's going on? Who's doing this? Rarity demanded. A loud tried to drown her voice away. You know you can handle a setback or two today. But that was the last thing I needed. Rarity's confused expression froze and began to warp into some horrified comprehension. Her mind fractured, seeing all too familiar Applejack walking towards her. Her mind piecing together the scene she had tired so desperately to forget. She cowered back from the advancing Applejack, letting out a whimper. When their flank connected with the far wall, she staggered and reached out a hoof to steady herself, knocking down a stack of newspapers, the pile scattered on the floor between them. Rarity and Applejack both looked down at the prompted volume atop of the pile. A copy of Vanity Mare. Rarity's eyes widened, reaching for it in a panic, but Applejack beat her to it, snatching it up in her hoof. What's this? Came an old, bitter voice of an orange mare. Rarity fought back the cascade of tears, unable to make a sound. The haunting voice of her past answered, echoing in her mind, The nothing, just a bit of light reading. Fancy Pants and Le Ferdless Divorce. A look behind the drama. Applejack read out loud, her eyes scanning the cover, and her hoof clenching the magazine tighter. Rarity took a sharp inhale, finding her voice again. Applejack, please, give it back. The arrogant voice in her cut through her, each word a barb piercing her heart with the regret and pain. Oh, it makes sense now. You can't just pry yourself away from the new gown sketches long enough to make a light bristle of apples just to make it in the cider pressed? And for what? To impress some stallion who didn't want you in the first place? Applejack! Applejack! A chill went down her spine, hearing a repeat of herself. I'm sorry, Rares. That was completely uncalled for. I'm just stressed. 10 barrels ruined. Whole day's work for naught. Orders piling up. Could have asked for every pony's help sooner, but always wait till it's too late. I'm sorry. I'm sure Fancy will love you in this new get-up, and hope he sees what you are amazing mare you really are. Rarity then jumped and screamed in shock as an old lantern fell from its precious perch that was on a near-top stack of boxes, glass shattering on impact, spray across the floor. It was old and empty, but as Rarity stared, tiny flicker of light sprang forth, like an echo of the flames once it contained. She lurched away from the wall, racing forward and stamping her hoof in the ghostly flames, paying no attention need to the glass or the pane, as she felt the shards embed themselves into her hoof. She glanced up at Applejack, seeing a blurred outline of her friend through the tears stinging her eyes. Did you hear that? Applejack asked, eyes wide in horror. She then turned and raced away, bouncing up the basement stairs without Rarity. No, Applejack, don't! Rarity screamed. as she raced after her friend. She tripped on the shifting pile of newspapers that littered the floor, her body landing awkwardly to one side. She only glanced at them for a moment before forcing herself back onto her hooves. The headline painted across the issue, fueling to her with fear. She sprinted towards the stairs, leaving a bloody trail of hoof marks at the top of scattered copies of from Ponyville. Each paper was titled Tragedy in bold letters under blurred image of Sweet Apple Acres. She then reached up to the cellar stairs in panic, throwing her full weight against the door. Rarity exploded up into the world of blinding light and heat. Disoriented, she blinked and squinted her eyes as she slowly adjusted to the scene before her. She then stood in her old beloved farmhouse, flames licking and consuming the well-worn wood. The smoke billowed all around the room, growing thicker and darker with each panic inhale. "You can't have them, Applejack. Please come back. Please don't leave me again." Rarity wailed over the sound of the inferno. She screamed as an apple-carved wood beam landed inches from her. Another fallen beam had forced against the wall, where burning wallpaper peeled away to reveal the scorched wooden walls beneath. Rarity blindly stumbled forward, barreling into Granny Smith's old rocking chair, and the crust of burning wood kindling beneath her hooves. "Applejack! Applejack!" she cried, before running blindly to the Apple family kitchen door. Rarity fell to the ground, her heart pounding beneath as her breath coming to a shuddering gasp. The smoke inhalation was making her lightheaded for weak, and she feared that she would lose consciousness soon. Forcing her mind through the mental fog, she rose and clutched the door handle, wrenching it down hard and pressed her full weight against it. Rarity staggered forward before falling hard into the familiar first door of the new boutique. She gasped for air, still sobbing as lungs burned, but she blinked away the tears and took the familiar surroundings of her boutique, or at least what she assumed to be familiar. Things have progressively changing around here, so she knew this comforting sight wouldn't last. After a few minutes of deep breaths, Rarity mustered through enough energy to drag herself up into the floor. She barely flinched when she heard somebody else in the room with her. She turned her head to the left and beheld an old-fashioned barber pony with a long dark mustache. He was sobbing wildly and pleading for some pony to forgive him as the cold blade of his razor slit a ruby trench across his bared throat. From her right, a new spectacle of dread with regret arose. She then turned to find the florist pony, curled herself and gulping down the mass quantities of vicious green liquid. Between gulps, she could hear her soft cries. "Mommy's coming! Mommy's coming, baby!" Rarity's gaze swept the room. More ponies appeared, each from a file she read, and now playing out in her final, terrifying moments before her. They were unaware of each other, including her, and spoke over one another the counterpony of dread and terror. Rarity stood her ground, watching each one with a stoic expression. The fear couldn't touch her. She wouldn't let it in. Then an abrupt silence that followed the final voice from behind her spoke with crystal clarity. "I didn't get to tell you." Rarity froze before angrily rounding her to confront herself. Looking up and down, she saw no distinct differences between her and this mirror phantom, which only served to disturb her more. The phantom like this chose before her, seemingly unaware of Rarity's presence. She watched as the spectator galloped over to the rummage her sewing supplies, until finally levitating out a long, sharp pair of heavy-duty clothing shears. She removed them from her protective lever for stealth, floating up to them eye level. Pale magic slowly opened the blades until they covered mere inches from her copy's eyes. Was this another trick, or was it a vision of her inevitable future? This is a poetic, really fitting for the metaphor for all my failures. I was blind to your pain, blind to what you really felt for me, and blind to what I was feeling for you too. I always knew I loved you, and when you chose Rainbow Dash over me, I guess I believed that you never truly cared. I found others I always did. But none could fill the void you left. And still, I refused to let myself look back. Now I understand you were just lost and miserable as I was, hoping against logic I could come back for you, much in the way I hope you'd come back for me. Please forgive me, Applejack. Forgive me for being so blind and for wasting what could have been. The propaganda gave one final cry of anguish before plunging to the shears of both hooves and magic deep into her eyes. Rarity watched as lifeless hooves fell away to reveal the carnage inflicted, blood oozing from the orifices that were now shears of new shelf. She closed her eyes, taking a long shuddering breath. Is it true? She opened them again to see Applejack, a slight ethereal glow around her figure, but otherwise the same. She reached out a hoof to her. As expected, it went right through. Yes, she whispered, too drained to horrify to cry. And you've been miserable ever since, haven't ya? Applejack said softly. Utterly, really, Rarity admitted. Deep down, I think I knew from the start that you really couldn't be there, but I thought I hoped. But I'm here, Rares, and I've come to take you away from all this pain and suffering, Applejack said. Offering a soft smile, she took a few steps towards Rarity with an outstretched hoof. What do you mean? It's time, Rare. It's time to go, Applejack said, pointing to the pairs of shears lying readily on Rarity's desk. Rarity hesitantly trotted over to them as she eyed the sharp blades. Horrific scene replayed in her mind. No, this isn't the end. I won't let it be. She bitterly tossed the heavy shears aside with her magic and started rummaging through her desk drawers in the picnic. What are you doing? Applejack asked. Rarity couldn't respond. She tore a piece of parchment paper from a sketchbook with a practical dress design and levitated a quill to its surface. She desperately scrawled up an urgent request for help, reading out loud subconsciously. Twilight, I'm trapped in this boutique. Please help me. I'm injured and... Rarity trailed off when the ink on the parchment paper started disappearing before her eyes. No, no! Rarity said, putting the quill to the paper and starting again before the ink faded away. Fine, you piece of shit, fine, Rarity screamed, penning only the word help before attempting to magic away. This time the ink remained, but the parchment didn't disappear. It should have. She focused on her magic, the consistency of her spell. Come on, come on! This is just gonna keep happening. Applejack's expression slowly changed. A tauntingly evil smile spread across her lips. What? I know I saw your name on that folder, Rarity. Eventually you'll do it. You'll have no choice. Why not stop the cycle here? Just come with me and you could be free of your guilt and regret. You know better. Rarity's voice echoed again. Same soft whisper it had been. This time, however, there was a sense of urgency, like an outcried truth of fighting to make itself heard. The words echoed in Rarity's heart beats, slowed along with her breaths. She stared hard at Applejack, her gaze bore into the earth pony with such intensity that her smile cracked. Rarity turned away momentarily, trotting towards the large armoire beside the worker desk. Opening it with her magic in a casual manner, she ran her hoof over the bolt of fabric, delighting the different textures, as if she were looking at something to start a dress. What you doing, Rarity? Applejack asked, but she ignored her. She took each blot of fabric from the armoire with her magic, tossing them into the air as far as she was able to, the cloth unraveling in different directions around the room. Rare? Rarity wasn't irritated. She continued to pry open the old wooden box, sitting alone on the side of her supplies. I was saving this. I was going to drink it on the opening day of the boutique. Ha ha! She laughed, levitating the bottle of wine in the air, examining the label. A 1946 strawberry merlot. It shouldn't go to waste. Wouldn't you agree? She asked. Carefully uncorking the bottle, she levitated the simple glass of wine out of another box and carefully poured herself a glass. The problem is, I quite agree with Red Herring. You do need to be stopped, Rarity pointed out. matter-of-factly. She turned towards Applejack, making sure to keep a firm eye contact, as she deliberately tipped the glass with her magic until a small stream of wine splashed on the fabric, cascaded at her hooves. And while I know this building isn't compromised by mostly brick, which cannot burn, old buildings such as these have wooden floors and ceilings. Not to mention the fact that the bricks don't do very well in tension, and you were aware of the mortar between the bricks? Often they're highly susceptible to flame.